So this is Compass's first podcast, and this podcast is going to be exploring the connection between Black British history, Caribbean history, kind of tying the two together. And the reason why I brought you both is because of your expertise within this area. So Lavinia Stennett, CEO and a founder of the Black Curriculum, and Robert Primus, Director of Humanities and History teacher. I'm Kari Perino, founder and CEO of Compass. I really want to explore this conversation for a lot of reasons, as this will be launched on Windrush Day. One of the things I want to explore is looking at this through kind of a past, present, future lens. So starting with the past, looking at what we just talked about, Windrush Day, Windrush Generation, who actually came on the HMS Windrush, and was one of the largest mass migrations by Caribbeans to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom invited those who were part of their former colonies to come to the UK to help build up the UK after the war. Some initial maybe thoughts around what the Windrush Generation means to both of you would be, I think starting there, that would be great.
My grandma was part of the Windrush Generation, and so whenever I think of Windrush, I think of her, I think of just foresight. Even though you don't know what you're going to get yourself into, being able to, at such a young age, I think she was 19 or something, one child, having that foresight, that determination to build a life that you don't know. And I think in comparison to the comfort and the stability that we have now, I could not imagine at 19 getting on a boat. We're not talking about a plane, getting on a boat to go across the seas to this place where you think the streets are paved with gold. And I think that and even though she was surrounded by community, that kind of Caribbean community had a lot of vision and belief in their ability to have a better future. And that's not lost on me, and it's paved the way obviously for a lot of us, and the future that she didn't even think about when she was making her moves. So I think pioneers, really, bravery, pioneers, risk takers.
Thank you, Robert.
I like the words pioneers and bravery, because it reminds me of my great grandma, similar vibe. When she actually came here, she had 5 kids, and she only brought one child with her about 5, which was my grandmother. So I often reflect on that kind of decision that she had to make, leaving her 4 other children in Jamaica and decided to come here. And it's only been a handful of times since then that she's seen them. And it really makes you think. I've never lived abroad for an extended period of time. What does it take someone to actually pack up and go abroad and be ready to resettle and start a new life somewhere else? And also I really feel and I include myself in this as well, it's been very uplifting to see how these stories that were not really reflected on up until very recently are finding a place in the narrative of British history, but also just being fully acknowledged for their importance for us as Black people as well, in terms of changing the trajectory of so many of our families, but also being a point of separation and a disconnect between families as well. I don't know what it's like for you guys, but my grandma came here with one of her 5 kids, and the others it's been very difficult at times to maintain a kind of solid relationship with them. And I always think about for someone to do that and to really believe in what they were doing, and that it was the right thing for them and their family, that takes a lot. And I think it's just cool that we're now in a place where we can probably recognise those struggles and recognise what our forebears went through in that respect.
I think about that quite a lot sometimes. I think my trip to St. Lucia was really back to, as an adult, for the first time, was actually really emotional. I even think about it now, and I actually getting quite emotional thinking about it, because I just think about my grandparents having died in this country, wanting to go back home, and they constantly saw St. Lucia as home. They were just well, we're going to go back home eventually. And when I touched St. Lucia, I was just like, wow, like I am in the country that like that they left, and they had no idea that they probably, I don't know, like I wish I could ask them these questions now, but like that they probably had no idea that like when they left they would never return, like that then the life that they were building here was permanent.
So many people, it wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be like a 5 year.
Exactly, it was like a temporary. I was like, because why wouldn't you want to go back to like the country where you are from, where you understand the community and the culture, what you know? And I think one of the questions that constantly like goes through my mind, especially when I was there, I did feel like I was so sad I didn't bring something of theirs. Like I was just like like I feel like something symbolic to like almost feel like like I'm like I brought you back home. Would have been really like beautiful, but I felt really like I was like, wow, like I'm back in this place where they left, however many years ago now, to create a life, and they now have a whole generation who are now established here in the UK. And I think to myself, like, what that journey would have been like for them, like attempting to integrate into a society where they were called upon to, like a lot of the Caribbeans were called upon to come here to work, and saw this as an opportunity to be able to make money and to be able to build, whether it was build homes back home, build some sort of stability, whatever it was like, okay, great, this is an opportunity for us. And that they were British. It was an extension, by being in the Caribbean, those British colonies were an extension of Britain.
And that's the thing to remember as well, like when these movements took place, first of all, you say these were British citizens moving basically within Britain, but also they were very much going home in a sense, like it's always, so yeah, it's the mother country. That's how it was sold to them. It's kind of like, come back. And it's also very interesting, like in terms of kind of like thinking about different experiences as well, because my grandma's the opposite to yours in the sense that she doesn't want to, like, she wants to be buried here. Like she very much sees this as home, and I think it's because she still sees that kind of like mother country ideal in Britain, in terms of it being like the final place where kind of like people belonged in that sense. And it's also very interesting to see how obviously that kind of like that ideal was, like the reality of it was obviously very different for many people when they arrived.
Well, yeah, I think that's a lot to do also like the schooling, like the colonial schooling, the British schooling, everything that because we're talking about nations that were still colonial, or like even though they went through like the post-colonial period in like the 60s, they were still experiencing the remnants of like this colonial indirect and very direct rule. And I think that like the education, just even how you speak, like today, like the older generation, they love to be speaky-spokey, they love to have like associations with like things Britishness, they love the Queen, they love Diana, they love the associations of everything that's like British, right? Not all of them, but I think there is that generation that like wants that really close association and proximity, but I think that's due to the education of where they're coming from. And like maybe our desire as like 2 to 3 generations separated from that is to go back home, which is a little bit more romanticized, but for them it's like, no, but this is home.
That's
the acceptance is home. Home for them is associated with poverty, economic decline, societal, moral decline. So coming to Britain is like was seen as something that is like to aspire to, build a life, have security. So it's just interesting how we've seen over the years how that's changed, but I think a lot of it is due to like the schooling and British system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the point of, I guess, like how those who did come here integrated into British society, and some of the struggles that they would have faced integrating as well. I mean, that whilst they may have been invited, they certainly weren't welcomed by everyone in terms of some of the ways in which some of the racism that they faced, both overt and covert, and the discrimination that they faced. For me, I guess now looking back at that, it's like the tenacity that many of them had to continue staying here, and I think this leads me kind of nicely into I guess the creation of Notting Hill, some of the why Notting Hill was created, some of the race riots that led into its creation, and as we just kind of mentioned, around some of the ways in which a lot of the Caribbeans here faced such difficulty with some of the British people here, where they were either like overtly or covertly discriminated against.
Okay, so there was a racist attack on a carpenter called Kelso Train, and I think that there were also uprisings around the same time, and that's what led Claudia Jones and Brown, I was gonna say Brown, thank you, like to create like a version of Caribbean culture and carnival, but situated in Notting Hill before things got worse. But yeah, it was in response to, I think the community was just fed up. Like,
it's to turn back to what you said in terms of, I was just thinking about the idea of being invited versus being unwelcome, and I'm thinking of like who was making the invitation versus who were the people that were not welcome, and it kind of makes me think of like I know that the intersectionality between like race and class, in the sense that it was the government, it was very much like the elite and those in power that were calling on like those in the colonies,
it's
basically
like the
to
equivalent
make
of
that
like
change.
Swella Braverman right now making a call out, yo guys, like
Absolutely.
But it's literally that, and then the people arriving here, and then like normal conservative voters not actually, like wanting to integrate, and it was very much that, and like even thinking about like Notting Hill, it's like when they got here, the reasons why they moved to Notting Hill was because there was I can't remember his name, but there was a landlord there, and he was basically notorious for having like slum landlords. So he owned about 400 like houses, right? And because he knew that none of the other landlords would rent to black people, he just basically just charged like very low rent for very poor living conditions, and that just created like I guess like a febrile environment between like the same people, like the working classes that were there, and the masses. And then we have the event that you're talking about, where things kind of just like kind of erupt.
I mean, there were several different eruptions that happened that led up until to that point as well. I mean, when we think about some of it's a very interesting term, race riots, where actually I find the term interesting for a lot of reasons, because it kind of makes it seem like as if like that it doesn't really capture what the discontentment was. It kind of just depicts it as there's these
noisy
black people, exactly, noisy black people, as opposed to there were real issues of discontentment that they deserved to be angry about. Whether it was around housing, whether like the housing that you just kind of the dilapidated, poor living conditions that many of them were forced to go through, and employment and education. And I'm specifically talking about, there are like two riots. There's don't ask me for years.
That's 58. 58 was because it's the summer of 1958 basically, and it was basically over. It was a mixed race couple. They had an argument in Notting Hill, and there were some teddy boys. So back in the day, like teddy boys were like
the guys
that used to roam the streets, basically causing trouble.
And it was an interracial couple.
It was an interracial couple.
Yeah.
And they kind of like caught air of what was going on, and they it was basically a week of white attacks against like black people in Notting Hill. Which is why I like you two's kind of like description of a riot, because it made me think basically like when we say race riot, it makes you think of like a black v white kind of like armed uprising, but it was really more, in my opinion, a series of attacks on the black community. The police were not willing to do anything about it, so they armed themselves and they responded back as they knew they should. And that was literally it. It was like a equality with like attack and counter attack. And that's where like the Claudia Jones element comes into it in terms of like organising the Caribbean Carnival. I think in '59, that summer of '59. No, not even the summer actually. It was like the spring of '59.
Were you there?
Oh my god! No way! It was the wistful look back. I was literally gonna ask. I was like, how old are you?
If you look online, there's pictures of it.
Okay.
And basically, the first carnival was at St Pancras Town Hall. It's on the Euston Road now.
Okay.
And it was like January 1959, and it was an indoor kind of thing, right? And they had the BBC there. So I've never seen a recording of it, but there is some, maybe like the BBC archives or something. There's a recording of it, and it was more like almost like a pageant in the sense that it was like a proper like traditional kind of like like competition kind of thing. And then they had the celebration after, and that was all what she organised to kind of like I guess like counter the narrative in terms of what was going on before.
Which I think really like incredible legacy that Claudia Jones left behind of wanting to create something like that was attempting to share Caribbean history and culture, and what a wonderful like legacy is left behind. So I think that's also something like just connecting that actually to the present. That's something that we really need to think about when we think about what the reason why Notting Hill Carnival exists now. It was born out of a riot, but it was actually to be able to create community cohesion, and I think that's something that we really need to remember every time we hear this narrative around how dangerous Carnival is.
Yeah, or they should move to like Hyde Park.
Right, because there's a reason why it's there to begin with. But sorry, you
were yeah, I mean, I was only going to say that in addition, it reminds me a lot about, I don't know, I often think about so many of the such cool parts of West Indian culture in specifically comes out of like struggle, and I always just find it interesting how we're able to repackage these kind of like moments as ones of celebration when they should otherwise like not be. Do you know what I mean? Well, not be, but they could have been a different way, and like Carnival is a good example of that, as you said, in terms of it being made into like a celebration event.
Yeah.
I think we embody celebration. Like our culture is our cultures are celebratory and very spiritual, and it's like, yeah, I don't want to sound like there's like, Americans, they love like, okay, not Americans, but there's a group of people that love like the American soul and like the blues and stuff, and they're like, oh, how have like these black people persevered, and like there's this obsession with like soul in the face of like
Diversity.
Yeah, and I just think that's like a narrative that's kind of problematic, but I think that our cultures are super celebratory.
Yeah.
And that's who we are.
Yeah.
And that's the legacy. And I think what we probably need to see, instead of seeing like Carnival as something that is demonized or has issues today, is rather seeing a society that has the issues today, because even after Carnival was created, you still had like police being antagonistic. Like, even though the black communities created something joyous and celebratory that was for everybody, the police are still being anti and still being oppressive. So surely our analysis of violence is more to do with the society rather than our communities.
Absolutely.
But I just don't think this society, they just lack the introspection to see that they are the problem.
Is it that they lack the introspection, or is it that they're being fed a narrative around, like when we think about the reporting of Notting Hill Carnival and that the crime reporting, that's the level of statistics that are given about Notting Hill Carnival, that's not done for Glastonbury, that's not done for Reading Festival, that's not done for anything that's of a large scale, so I think the reporting adds a narrative and a layer to to Notting Hill Carnival that was already always going to have that added layer because of the fact that it's predominantly attended by Caribbean people, black people celebrating black culture, black history. Is already going to have this problematic element to the wider majority of the country.
Yeah.
So it's so easy to be able to kind of paint it as this kind of like subversive, really like why does this thing still exist? Why has it not been shut down? So, but I mean, otherwise I completely agree.
Yeah, I think the media is like a huge issue, but wherever there are black people in numbers, we're just surveilled intensely. Like, think of it as like a carnival. Like, it's seen in their eyes as like the worst thing that could ever happen.
Yeah. I want to go back to what created these conditions for, and I love that we even segued into like talking about carnival, and it's because I'll be there. Listen, carnival is just my heart. With like when August comes, I'm just like, it's time. I'm ready. I've been waiting for carnival. I'm like, it's just so beautiful. Like, so I could talk about carnival forever. I feel like that could be a whole separate. But I want to get back to what created the conditions for these rights, and that was the first right, and then we fast forward because this is kind of talking about what the conditions were for black Caribbean people who were in the UK and kind of the issues they faced around housing, employment, education, and how that kind of like led to the discontentment. So we heard about that particular riot, and then there was another riot later on. Is it 81?
Yeah, it was 81.
81 Brixton.
Yeah. In the 70s.
What was in the 70s?
The mangrove.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
All right. So basically, what it is, right, is that, as you kind of mentioned already,
and Moss Side.
Black.
Moss Side riot.
When was that? That was 81 as well, right? 83.
Yeah, 83.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So we have a situation where the masses have arrived, and this is another thing as well to remember. Like, many of them, when they got here, not like. Actually came from like fairly decent families, and like, you know, like had the skill set to like earn like what would, like, if they were perhaps white, be like a middle class, like, you know, like income and stuff. Like don't know if you guys have seen this play Small Island, but the lady, she leaves as like a teacher or something, and she comes and I can't remember what she's doing, but basically a lot of people are doing jobs that don't match their expertise and their skills, and they're essentially forced into housing. So like, when we think of like Brixton and stuff like that, one of the reasons why, and I only learned this a few years ago, one of the reasons why so many people migrate to Brixton specifically is because the workhouse was near Clapham. So it made sense to live in Brixton because you had to go to the employment register office to find work, right? And then you've got like kind of like
there was a bunker as well. There's a bunker in Clapham.
For
doing all storage.
And then you've got kind of like in West London, it's more like the smaller islands that kind of like congregate around there. But kind of like Lincoln Tort Lavinia said, there's always this kind of like perceived threat of the black masses like organising, regardless of what it looks like. It's always, especially like in this country, like deemed as like something that should be like monitored or overseen. And then we have basically that continuing like from the 60s. And then like thinking about Notting Hill as well, like in the 70s, there's obviously the police are using these vagrancy laws from like the Tudor times to stop and search like black guys in Brixton. Basically, the law is like basically like if you're the sus laws, like if you're like anybody who's like not you know, like anyone who looks suspicious basically is getting stopped and searched. So what I'm basically trying to say is we have a situation where we have like a segregated country, like these people are forced now to live in these areas, which is why also we should defend like places like Brixton and keep them as ours for so long, because we, you know what I'm saying, like it's very much ours.
I mean,
but then also at the time the context is that like ordinary white folks, working class, felt that black people were stealing their jobs. So you have a government that's not communicating to the white population, that they have literally sent this ad out to the colonies, to the Commonwealth to say, come. They're not creating enough, also post-war, right? That's the context. So the industries are already like in a state of decline, and the government is not creating jobs for everyone. So there's a level of competition, and the government is not stepping in to explain this is the context. So what people are doing is making up a situation in their own heads between themselves and looking at the first thing that they see, which is colour. And they're saying that black people are here to steal our jobs and steal our women.
Yeah.
And it's just a lack of explanation. There's no explanation. It's just like, this is what I see, and it's just pure xenophobia.
Like 2 weeks before he died, Malcolm X went to, was it Smethwick in Birmingham, because he recognised like the racial tensions there. Like he saw parallels basically between like the experience of black people there and like what was going on in America as well.
Yeah.
And it was very much, as you said, like this perceived threat, and then the government that you said not really properly explaining things, and in trying to stay in power.
Yeah, capitalising.
Right, but they also like change it. So basically what allows like people to come here is that the government basically say like anybody who's a British citizen can come to the UK, and they did so thinking that nobody would actually come. And then people started coming, and then they started, I can't remember, I think it's like the Commonwealth Immigration Act, but if you read the laws of it, you'll see they basically, I think it's like 65, they changed it and they redefined like what like Commonwealth citizen is. Yeah. And if you read the essence, it's a very racialised like law basically, and it essentially said, the essence of it is basically black folk like need to stay.
So because I think wasn't it New Zealand, Australia, those countries were very much were exempt and were treated with welcome. So already there's what we're seeing is like the ways in which policy is being created to be able to keep more Caribbeans from coming, because it was like, okay, well, there's already too many of you. This idea that like there's too many.
And then they have the problem of like, well, how do you deal with the ones that are already here?
Right. Okay. One of the issues that connecting the point that were around from the past to the present, and how education has still been a running theme of not being able to serve black people. And that educational outcomes for black Caribbean boys are still really low.
And the kind of
No, I was going to say, and then connecting the fact that like at primary school, a lot of these young black boys are actually performing well and above their peers until they get into secondary school. And so then we start seeing the ways in which they fall behind.
I was just going to say, I remember Khaled kind of like tweeting something some time ago about, he was comparing basically the educational outcomes of black Caribbean boys here versus black boys in the Caribbean like at present. And essentially, the only thing that can kind of explain the underperformance of black children here is the society that they live within, because the same children, similar demographic in Jamaica, outperform like everybody else. And the way how he presented it, like it serves to like turn on the heads a lot of stereotypes that even like I kind of like subscribe to in terms of just like understanding the expectations and that. And it's interesting. I think the essence of it is that schools, past and present, but to a lesser extent now, don't understand the unique like circumstances of black children, particularly black boys, but also black girls as well. And I think in order for, as a teacher myself, what I see is that school leaders and individual school teachers just don't fully understand the black experience, nor do they really make any effort to sometimes, because they see it through the context of what they're shown like through the media and the like, you know, like government and stuff like that. And all it does is just serves to, as you said, like negatively affects like black children basically. And you see that with like the educational subnormal like and it still continues like throughout this day in terms of like kids just not get an opportunity to fully access what they're capable of, and maybe being pushed towards instead like sport or other things where they can excel because they haven't had a chance to fully access the curriculum in like the context that they like understand, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lavinia, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I think you've made some really key points, like the understanding that teachers have of students is not aligned to like recognising their full humanity. So they come into the classroom, already they're problematized. You don't sound right, you're not dressed right, your hair's not, it's just like, it's always a deficit, like we're looked on like with a deficit lens rather than this is what you have to add. And I think the school system here doesn't feel like it needs to adapt. It's very like, this is the way things are, this is how it's been, and get rid of the program rather than actually adapting to the abilities and the skills that we actually have in ourselves innately, because we see them, we know them, you know, we experience them all the time. And I think the structures they play into them themselves, like teachers that problematize students, feeds into how the students perform in the exams, right? So even when you think about the exams then are linked to like outcomes. So, you know, what type of work you go into, what kind of like, even if it's college, right? Or just like the systems outside. So education kind of like, if it's wrong, it's gonna funnel one into another wrong system, because that's the starting point. So I think, yeah, it's just, it's teachers, but it's also the systems that complement the education system that I think come from this perspective of just us boys being a problem. And we come to this later, but like the cultures we're in and the society we're in, like, it doesn't help. But I think, like, I've known black boys who even at primary school were excluded. How can you exclude a primary school child, right? So I think like it starts even before secondary school, from nursery. From nursery, really. It's scary. It's quite scary when you think about it.
It is. I mean, and then the impact it has from, because we see the direct link from exclusion to people referral units to prison, like, and how that the direct link.
And even in prisons, like I think a disproportionate number of prison inmates are SEM, black, like regardless of race, right? Which basically ties into what you say in terms of the educational system just plainly failing them, right? You know, yeah, it's just it makes me kind of, I feel like black children don't really get the chance to be children, and then it just becomes, it's like a feedback loop, like you said, it just becomes like a fulfilling like prophecy.
Yeah. And I think I think about the fact that we, you know, this, a lot of the stats that we can pull on are around black boys, and I definitely want us to think about the fact that because of the fact that there are so many black girls who do achieve within this system, that we actually then forget that there are a lot of black girls who are not being served by the education system as well, and where they fall through the cracks too, and where they are, I mean, where we saw that incident with the child queue, and the ways in which young black girls are also just not protected when it comes to within the education system and then beyond into womanhood. I wanted to touch on, even though it's not it's present in terms of within recent years, but the Windrush scandal, where many of those Caribbeans who came over on the Windrush brought children with them. They travelled on their passports. Those children became pensioners. Their parents or their guardian, whoever brought them here, passed away, and it's only many of them found out a lot later on down the line that actually we don't have the paperwork that signifies that we're British, but we've lived here our entire life. We've paid taxes here. We are British. This is all we know. And when for many of them who were then whether it was applying for jobs or whether they were wanting to leave the country to go visit another country and then realizing they had to renew travel papers, whatever it was, were then realizing, oh, actually, now Home Office are telling me I'm actually not a citizen, I'm an illegal immigrant.
I just see the way that they treated people from Ukraine. Oh my gosh, the urgency, the level of detail, the open doors. I'm like, where was this energy for the Windrush generation when we found out in 2017 that this was like a national scandal, and the lack of urgency, you still, I know people who are still trying to find out information on how to get, some money back from this scheme that apparently is open and transparent, but yet people are finding it really difficult. Number one, to apply because you've got so much hoops to jump through that you've got to qualify, and it's just so much rules attached to it, whereas other processes for different communities, racialized communities, are so easy, transparent, open, and it's just it's not fair. I just think that there's no way to justify, there is a way to justify. I think the way that we've been viewed throughout history is we're aliens to this British land, and that's the same theory that's carried through, the otherness, you don't matter. Despite your contributions, despite having everything that's legal, that's just doesn't matter. You're not British. And that means that British is then synonymous with what?
Whiteness.
Well, if not, what else?
Yeah.
Because you pay tax, as you say, you go to school, you speak English, you eat fish and chips on a Friday, Yorkshire puds on a Sunday. So, what other qualifiers are there to meet this criteria of Britishness? It's just so elusive, and it's deeply divisive and discouraging, and it just sends the message to future generations that you're just not safe.
And that will lead me into questions around the future, because of that particular point that was made. It's there's this constant fear of critiquing the establishment, critiquing government.
It really felt like these paths were deliberately made difficult, and we saw that you said, we saw how with Ukraine it was made much more easier to travel to the country. And yeah, it's very difficult to see how it wasn't deliberate, and it was also a very big reminder for me, for everyone that I know, really, what does citizenship actually mean? What does it actually mean? Because what we learned is that it can be taken away from you just like that. And even these these people, when they came here as British citizens. They came here as British citizens, bro. So just the idea that could actually, a government can actually pass a law that removes the citizenship status of people. It's just crazy. And then I don't know. For me, it all speaks into everything that we've been talking to, in terms of the fact that really, in the essence, we're not really wanted in this country. And so long as we are here, we're like a thorn in the spine of mainstream society. They tolerate us. They take, for the most part, the best things of our culture and package it as something different. But really and truly, if they had the choice, we wouldn't be here, because they really see us more as a problem than anything else. And for me, nothing else can explain this scandal other than that.
What does the future look like? Because what we're referring to here is a class of people who've had this line of thought throughout generations, and typically we always refer to an older generation. But what about the people that are our age that are going to step into roles in the future? Is this going to continue in the same way? What level of trust? And I trust no one in that way, but but seriously, how do we determine or guarantee a level of safety with the people that are in our gen to not continue past?
So one of the things that I guess I ask myself quite often is, how were things like this challenged in the past? And I look to the past and I see the ways in which there were real concerted efforts to push back against government policies, against the tyranny that was that many were being, facing, whether it was the very communities that they were in or from the police. And I sometimes think that what does it take for us to push back I think my worry is that we are not pushing back enough sometimes, and I guess that would be my like reflection on like the future is like what would be the last straw? What is the thing that now sends us to say, actually, do you know what? This is enough. What does our legacy look like? And particularly, I guess, thinking about our past, the present, what is the type of future that we need to build for ourselves as Black British Caribbeans?
I think the answer has always been there about what we do for our future. And I just go back to history, we just keep creating joyous moments. Like, I think there is like something about like resistance and, protest, but I think at the core of what we do and who we are, like we are so inspired by each other, inspired by spiritual realms, we're inspired by creating life and new worlds, new ways of seeing the world, that I think that we don't have to do anything different about that. Like, that is our survival. So I think that is the future of us in the UK and outside. And I think personally, I think individuals need to decide like whether their home is here or whether it's somewhere else. And I think we're starting that conversation now, like, well, what is home? What does my home look like? What does my children's home look like? Is it here? Is it back home in the Caribbean or back home in a country in Africa? Or is it somewhere else? And I think that those are the kind of conversations that sometimes could kind of create new avenues for us to, build again. So the same kind of thought process our grandparents went through, we're starting to have now, which is interesting. So I just hope that it's going to be a future of joy in the most realistic way.
Yeah, I love that.
So I feel like for all of the reasons that we stated, life for Black Britons is a complex, like it's very nuanced. I think we all recognise that this isn't the ideal place where we could be, and there are many things wrong with like the society that we live in. But at the same time, for the reasons that we've all said, we've managed to make it work for us, and we've managed to make it home. Which reminds me of there's a historian called Kehinde Andrews. It's Andrews, right? And he's got a book basically called Rethinking Black Radicalism. What he says in there is that you can compare the experience of African Americans to the experience of Black British Caribbeans, in the sense that post World War I, African Americans moved from the south up to the north, like for better opportunities, manufacturing and so on and so forth. Even after World War II, actually, there was more Africans moved to the north after World War II than they did during the Great Migration. And there's parallels between that and like us of Caribbean heritage moving from the Caribbean, for like similar climate, similar history in terms of like, there's them being slave colonies, etc., and moving to the UK in search of a higher living standards and better, a better way of life. We are materially better off, or up until the cost of living crisis, than like our parents and stuff. And we do have better opportunities than like our parents and grandparents for the reasons that we said. To what extent do we assimilate in this society that wasn't built for us and was actually built on the backs of us, is the question that I don't really have the answers to, because I'm still trying to work out for myself as an individual. And it also reminds me of a conversation I had with my friend, which brings us kind of like full circle. I was talking to my friend just in general about the plights and the struggles of every person basically under 40 in this country in terms of like home ownership, salary, stable income, etc. The things that were promised to us regardless as like just British people, and the idea of like social mobility. I remember my friend saying to me like, when our parents came here, or our grandparents, whatever, they made a decision to move. They recognised that life wasn't static for them in the Caribbean. And for us, it can be this, like, there's nothing basically keeping us here in this country. There's nothing stopping us from moving to Dubai, to Australia if we need to, you know what I'm saying, to make things better. Other than it being home. So like, I suppose what I'm trying to say basically is we either have a choice of making this work for us in the way that I think we have been for centuries actually, in terms of like black people in Britain, because we've been here from way before Windrush. But that obviously comes with the acceptance that this country's never going to fully accept us. So we take what we can from it, send what we can maybe back home for remittances, and just keep on going. Or is it a thing where we just, you know what I'm saying, completely separate? I think the future lies in, I think there's an element of like, I don't know the word of it, but kind of like accepting I think I'm at a point now where I've kind of accepted that, for better or for worse, the current like socio-economic setup is such that it's going to take a lot for us to challenge or like disrupt it in a meaningful way. So like we maybe have to learn to like work with it and take what we can from it. But within that system, as we always have done, we need to like retain community. Like you see when our grandparents bought homes, yeah, we're from South, all of us, right? Like when our grandparents bought homes like in Brixton, Stockwell, Clapham, whatever, they used the partner system to do it. In the sense that we would all put money in. I would be like, alright, cool guys, I want to, you know what I'm saying, take up money to make a deposit, and then over time I'd pay that back. I think basically the future lies in community, and the future lies in us utilising the resources that we can in this state for us, but also recognising that there is a limit to the extent to which that we'll ever fully assimilate for the reasons that we've basically said in this podcast. And as such, we should always be ready to get the fuck out.
Sounds like black capitalism with a plan.
But I don't want to even consign to that because it's inherently flawed, right? But it's kind of like, I mean, like, where else do we go from here? Like, I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we
like,
haven't been given much option.
we really haven't, and it's a case where if like, you know, like thinking about like the policing bill and everything in terms of like our options to actually resist and to express dissent. Like, where are we? But then at the same time, maybe the system that is the nature of the system. It wants us to think like there isn't any option, but actually there always is, isn't there? If we mobilise and get things together and start moving properly.
Exactly.
It's a sticky one, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you both. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation today. I really appreciate your insight. And yeah, I think following up from this, I really want, I guess, us to really think about what continue thinking about what that future looks like. And yeah, just thanking you both for your time and for contributing your thoughts again. So I appreciate you both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. All right.